Hi there. Welcome to this exam technique tutorial. It's looking at how to answer question 3a. That's the source utility, how useful. As you can see here, we've got a question and we'll have a look at the sources we're going to use in a minute. But do note that this source is worth 8 marks, therefore we should be roughly writing for about 12 minutes. That's 2 paragraphs. 6-minute paragraphs is kind of the rule. Also note that we're not just talking about usefulness in a kind of generality, but we have to have a look at the focus. In this case, it's supporting the reasons for supporting the Vietnam War. Next year could be opposition, could be a number of things. And if we have a look, all 8 marks are given over to AO3, which is the analysis and evaluation of source usefulness. Now, that doesn't mean we can't think, well, there's no knowledge having to be applied. There really, really is. So, what do the exam board want? Well, to score anything, you have to make a judgment about how useful the sources are. Take each one in turn. You're not combining them and you're not comparing them. Write one paragraph about how useful source B is and another one about how useful source C is. You're not comparing, you're not saying which is more useful. There's none of that required. Now, you need to give a judgment. And it says here it'll be supported by an undeveloped comment, either on the content of it or on the provenance. So what that means is that someone says, oh, this source is really useful because it talks about this. But it doesn't really do anything else. Or it says, oh, the source is not useful because it's a letter. If you're doing simple stuff like that, you're going to be in level 1. You might even just paraphrase some of the content. Notice, even in level 1, limited contextual knowledge is deployed. So they'll say, oh, well, the source isn't really useful. It's a letter about the Vietnam War, and I know that there were lots of letters sent home by soldiers. Or it could be, it talks about the Tet Offensive, and I know that was a really big battle. Things like that. Battle between North Vietnamese and the United States, that will get you into that. And you're scoring 1 to 2 marks for that. 3 to 5 marks is where you make a judgment about the usefulness and you focus on the inquiry that's given and you apply some valid criteria. So you're going to make a developed comment, get that there, related to the content. So you're going to start to analyze it looking at what's been said in the actual content of the picture or content of the written source. Notice it says and or the provenance, and provenance basically means the nature, the origin, and the purpose. You don't have to do all 3. You're doing maybe one of them and you'll say how that makes it relevant or usefulness. Now you'll do some analysis and you will back it up with some knowledge. You see there, and it's used to support the comments that you're making. Now, level 3, difference between getting there and moving down to level 3 is we can see we've got a very, very similar point up to here. But notice we talked about developed reasoning, which takes into account how the provenance affects the usefulness of the source content. So we're combining the two together. Sources are analysed, they support the reasoning for utility, so in other words, you're explaining your thinking, and you're backing up with evidence to support what you say. And that will get you into level 3. So let's have a look at source B. It's a letter written by Richard Marks. He's a Marine serving in Vietnam to his mother in December 1965, so early on in the war. And that there is critical. This is early on. America's just been involved in it. It's just after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. He headed the letter, his last will and testament. He told her what to do with his possessions, and he was killed 2 months afterwards. Now, he didn't, he feels he's going to die, but there's no guarantee he would know he would die not long afterwards. He says, I don't like being over here in Vietnam. I'm doing a job that must be done. I'm fighting an inevitable enemy that must be fought now or later. I am fighting to protect and maintain what I believe in and what I want to live in a democratic society. If I am killed while carrying out this mission, I want no one to cry or mourn for me. I want people to hold their heads high and be proud of me for the job I did. Now, obviously, the nature of this is that it's a letter. So the nature is, it says origin, the fact it's from a Marine over there, that affects how it's done. We can see it's from a Marine serving in Vietnam. So we know it's somebody who's out there, who feels about his support for the war. And his purpose is kind of clear. He feels he's going to die. Therefore, he's telling people what he wants them to think about and what he wants to happen to his possessions. The second picture, the second source we've got is a picture, and it's source C. It's a photograph showing a pro-war demonstration in Boston in 1969. And it shows that many different groups were there. We can see younger people here. We can see the kind of the working class, the older people here. And there's a key focus, which actually is in the first source we looked at, which is about stopping communist aggression. And here you can see the man is saluting, so he might be a veteran. So with regards to this then, the next focus is going to be looking at this example paragraph. I'm just going to rate it. It says source B can be seen as somewhat useful when examining the reasons for the support for the Vietnam War. This can be seen in the content of the source, where it states, I'm doing a job that must be done and fighting an inevitable enemy that must be fought. This is showing a sense of patriotism that was typical of many Americans early on in the conflict. Even after the Tet Offensive, most Americans still supported the Vietnam War. The nature of the source also makes it somewhat useful. The source is a letter home, and therefore would include the writer's personal thoughts, especially as he believes he will die in Vietnam. Now, you would then have a look at the usefulness of source C, but let's break this down. Well, the sentence in red is my judgment. I've said it's somewhat useful, and I think it's really clear. Try to avoid saying something's useful or not useful, and be prepared to just qualify it. Not everything's useful or not useful. Say it can be seen as extremely useful or not very useful, but remember to explain why that will be the case. So we then look at this connective. This can be seen, this can be seen in the content. So I'm making it clear. I'm now looking at the content of the source. And I've got a quote. I'm not just saying, it says this. I've actually applied a quote to back up what I'm doing. And then in the purple, I've got my explanation. It's showing a sense of patriotism. So I'm connecting the quote as to why it can be seen as useful. And I'm saying it was typical of many Americans early on in the conflict. Now, I could have used lots of different evidence. I could have talked about the fact that a lot of Americans supported Johnson during the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. They saw it as part of a wider conflict within the Cold War. But I've decided to apply it and say that even after the Tet Offensive of 1968, most Americans still supported the war, showing that his view was typical. It wasn't atypical. Lots of Americans felt like this. And that issue of typicality that I know Mr. Clayton and I have talked about, that's really critical. How typical was this source to help you understand how useful it is? I've then also said, well, it also is useful because it's a letter home. It's going to be his personal thoughts. It's not a propaganda poster. It's not a speech to someone where they're trying to influence them. This is a letter home to his parents or to his family. Therefore, it's going to have his personal thoughts, especially as he believes he will die in Vietnam. So I've tried to explain why that might be the case. Now, a really good thing for you to do then would be to use this framework and have a go at source C. Okay? Hope this has been useful. If you've got any queries or questions, please feel free to comment, and thank you for listening.